Hey Robert, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so let me see. Can I turn on the video here? Oh yeah, how about that? Oh, looks like Cancun. How about that? Well,
Nice, nice.
let's hit
Um,
the beach, huh?
yeah, looks cool. You can start whenever you'd like, Robert. We're good to go. So
Oh, I see. Okay. Uh, well, I guess no time like the president. Give me just a second here. Let me just real quick deal with it. I gotta plug in my phone or else it's gonna die on me here.
I know I just did that too.
It's like, okay, I guess it's charging. Get that going. Second. Oh. Okay. Yeah, it's gotten to the point where I gotta watch it. You may or may not be charging.
No
So,
problem. So what's going on, Robert? I know you wanted to talk about some of the things you've been doing, and if you have anything else that you wanted to cover, just feel free to take it wherever you want.
okay, yeah. See, okay, that's okay. Where do I start? Now, I think that what really needs to be talked about is the uh the the relationship between the Book of Enoch and Second Peter and Jude. And the reason I say that is because even though I've talked about this a lot in the past, every time I go over it, it's like I find something more subtle, something more nuanced, something a little more, because it just keeps making sense. I mean, something is true, it just stays true, and you keep finding more and more about it. And what I wanted to kind of go over today was the function here of these three books in tandem with one another. What is their relationship and what's going on with them? I think for anyone who's ever studied this casually, of course, I'll try to bring people up to speed because not everybody's going to know, what we've always talked about. There is a relationship between the two books in the Bible called Second Peter and Jude. Um, the thing that makes Jude unique and noteworthy in Christianity, and it's something that's kind of been known from way back, is the idea that it uses non-canonical sources. Um, for example, in Jude 9, uh, it is alleged anyway that he's speaking about a book called The Assumption of Moses. That's what the scholarly consensus seems to be, is that it is the Assumption of Moses. He speaks very much in particulars. He says things like in particulars, like Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, right? So he's speaking very particularly. He's dropping names and he's being very particular about it. There is a relationship and a dependency, if you will, of Second Peter to Jude. Peter will echo a lot of what Jude is saying in his second letter, but it's for the most part it's much more of a generalization and much less of a particularization. In other words, instead of saying Michael the archangel when contending with the devil about the body of Moses, like Jude says, he just says something very general, like that angels who are more powerful do not bring railing accusations against him in the presence of the Lord. So, in other words, it's the same thing, but it's kind of rephrased, right?
Mhm.
And there's other points of contact. Um, the idea of the angels in chains, for example, that is drawn from the Book of Enoch, that they were held down by chains. And so there's a particular reference to that book in both Jude and Second Peter. So the idea is, number one, what is the relationship here between Jude and Second Peter? And that's something I really want to develop here, especially in the context of the Book of Enoch, in particular Enoch chapter 1. Um, there is a quote that Jude gives in verse 15, really verses 14 and 15. He introduces the book and then he gives a very explicit word for word, like verbatim quote from this book. And I think that there's a reason why he's doing this. He's setting himself up in opposition to people who are fighting against the faith in the church. The very first thing he says is that, before I could write to you about our common salvation, right? It was necessary for me to write and to urge you to contend for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. And in the process of fighting for this faith, he's actually fighting for the he's actually using these apocryphal books, these non-canonical books, and he's actually stating, he's actually, like, if you look at the preface, for example, to Jude's quote, if you look at 14 and 15, for example, and I don't know of a better, more bases covered, if you will, introduction to any prophet anywhere in the Bible. Maybe you can point to one, but just off the top of my head, the way that he underscores certain facets of this book and this prophecy, I think cannot be denied even by skeptics. And that is, for example, um, that first of all, he cites the name by source, which isn't entirely uncommon. You see sources cited by name. Moses said this, spoken of by Daniel, those things. You'll see the names thrown out from time to time. But this goes way beyond that. And you have to look into the reasons as to why this might be. Just why it is that he's going through the effort. In other words, why is he dotting his I's and crossing his T's so clearly here for this particular prophecy? And the contention really is the teaching really is that it is of utmost importance, that our common salvation, in other words, is at stake here. In other words,
Mhm.
when he says common salvation, like, we think of salvation mostly in terms of individual salvation. Like, we think, am I saved? Are you once saved, always saved? People ask all these questions about what is
Right.
individual salvation, right? And that's
Mhm.
something that's been talked about over the centuries. It's just a thing. Um, but Jude is talking about something a lot more inclusive here. He's talking about the common salvation, all of us, right? In other words, there's something that delivers all of us from this world. And just what it is lies written in his book. For example, once you recognize, for example, when he talks about these people who have crept in unawares, these ungodly men, think of the way he uses the term ungodly men. And Peter does too. He talks about the ungodly, right? When you read the book of Enoch, the very first thing it talks about is that like it starts out saying, like, the words of the blessing of Enoch wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation when the wicked and the godless sort of be removed, right? So in other
Mhm.
words, he already states that the purpose of the book is to function as a blessing for the people who are to be around on the day of tribulation when the wicked and the godless are to be removed. So number one, they're here during the
Yep.
tribulation, according to
Mhm.
Enoch, and they are there essentially. This book is there to help them, us, in other words, to remove the wicked and the ungodly. Now, if Jude and Peter clearly identify those people who have infiltrated the church as wicked and ungodly men,
Mhm.
it is the removal of who? It is removal of the people who have infiltrated the church. Now,
Right.
the implication is that these people are going to be around till the end of the age, the end of the church age. And Peter himself, in his first book, talks about that too. He says that judgment begins at the house of God, right?
Mhm.
And so, for these 2,000 years, is there is there going to be a reckoning of some sort?
Yep.
Is there going to be a judgment, if you will, of these 2,000 years? And what I'm saying is that this is exactly it. That, for example, you can create the profile, if you will, of these people who have crept in unawares. And you can see that, for example, Peter and Jude speak of them in the most negative and pejorative of ways. He talks about them as a dog that returns to eat its own vomit, or a pig
Mhm.
that goes wallowing in its own filth or something in the mire,
Right.
right?
Right.
So the idea is that he's speaking of essentially these people as dogs, as pigs. In other words, they're unclean animals, right? He
Yep.
speaks of them. He speaks of them in reference to Korah. They speak to him in reference to Balaam. They speak of them in reference to Cain, for example. These are some really bad dudes, right?
Right.
These
And
are
all those people, all those people went after money as opposed to God's word. They went after the fame and the fortune of what this knowledge can bring, and they like to have the flowing robes and all that kind of stuff as opposed to just caring about saving people's souls with the truth, basically.
Well, but see, that's what this book exists for. These books actually work together, and that's what I'm hoping to show and hoping to demonstrate in all of this. I'm assuming that most of your readers, I would, or your little watchers, have read the Bible and probably the Book of Enoch. So I don't probably have to go in a chapter and verse on everything. I think we can talk about this sort of freely.
Right.
Need to go look something up. It's really only 3 books. I would almost limited just to Enoch chapter 1 because it's enough to
Yeah,
to
I know. I
to
know.
carry forth the conversation just
It
based
really
on
it,
that. So
it
if you're
does
not
pack a
familiar,
punch,
go
yeah.
read Enoch chapter 1, go read the book of Jude, go read the second book of Peter, and you'll be able to follow this conversation. But what they're doing is, see, by the book of Enoch saying that it is not for his generation, but it is for a future generation, it implies a mechanism, it implies something is going to exist to allow that book to come back into Christianity or come back into the discussion, if you will, at the time of the removal of the wicked and the ungodly. And once you identify that these ungodly people are the ones who are running the church, and moreover, once you recognize, and this is about recognition, Peter talks about knowledge. He talks about remembrance. He doesn't talk about belief as much. He talks about faith, but he talks about adding to your faith knowledge and works and other kinds of things, right?
Right, right,
It's
right.
faith
Mhm.
plus this knowledge. It's faith plus this understanding. In other words, you wouldn't get to this understanding unless it were by faith. For example, um, just to get at the like faith that he has, as he talks about, this is a letter that is written to those who have achieved a like faith as us. In other words,
Mhm.
that our faith reflects their faith. So it's important to understand and align ourselves and our faith with what he is teaching. So it's paramount to understand what his teachings are and what his message is. Because and the same with Jude too, you would assume, because um God, there's almost too much to talk about here. It's so insane. Um, when you look at Jude's preface, for example, the supposition is the book of Jude was written first because again it particularizes Michael, the archangel, when contending with, and Peter seems to be commentary on that. So you can kind of surmise just from that that Jude was written first and that Peter was written after. So somehow this book is either brought to Peter or he thinks of it as the apt book to sort of make commentary on to make his point. I think you can figure it out. I think there are ways that you can kind of piece it all together and look at all the breadcrumbs and look at all the evidence that's left to us and piece together the scenario of what's going on here. The idea is that there is a controversy within the early church that has to do with the notion that our concept of Jesus um, is solely based upon the law and the prophets. That it is based in, and that's something that's really common in Christianity. The idea that it is purely the law and the prophets that are inspired and really nothing else. That's just something that's ingrained in Christianity. And that isn't to say that they're not, but it also belies the fact that here you are reading this canonical book of Jude, or here you are reading this canonical book of Peter, and they are reading these other books. And just as importantly, you are not. So
Mhm.
there's a difference between you and them in terms of their acceptance of this book. They accept it clearly, whereas we, the church, do not. Um, so um, so the idea is that if you can draw the parallels between our church and those who are infiltrating the church, you'll see that we believe as they do. In other words,
Mhm.
if Jude is written as a rebuttal to these people, and they think about it, he cites the name of the source, so he gives it its authenticity. The reason he does that is because they do not.
Mhm.
They question the authenticity of it. They question the validity of it. This is why he has to underscore it. This is him, dotting his I's and crossing his T's, so to speak, in terms of his preface. Because again, I don't think you'll find a more emphatic preface anywhere to any kind of verse, anywhere in scripture at all.
Well, can I say one thing, Robert?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just as a side thing. Okay, so um I've mentioned before, but I went to Salem Christian School in New Hampshire my whole life from kindergarten to eighth grade. Then I went to three different Christian high schools, and it took from kindergarten, a chapel twice a day, plus church on Sundays and youth group. It took from kindergarten until I was a freshman in high school before I even knew that Enoch was an actual person in the Bible. Nobody had ever talked about him before. So it's not something that is known, in my opinion, in the past at least 15, 20 years. Nobody is talking about Enoch. I have not been to a church, really a normal church, since a regular Baptist type church. So I don't know if they're even talking about it in churches, except for the show that you do on YouTube with that church. That's the only person I've ever seen talk about Enoch as an authority. You know what I'm saying? Most people will say, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah." Like I think Dr. Chuck Missler or something like talked about him and stuff like that. Like they mention him, but it's always like he doesn't have any authority. He wasn't that important, but he's one of the two witnesses, one of the only people that didn't die, one of the people that's going to fight the Antichrist at the end, one of the, directly said from Jude, Jesus's half brother, that Enoch is seventh from Adam, so he's pre-flood, and he was taken by God. So, and never mind all the things that they don't mention in the footnotes of the canon, which tell you that the angel that was protecting Israel in the desert was Metatron, which is what Enoch became when he went to heaven. It tells you that in Third Enoch, and there's a lot of different books that mention the fact that Enoch became Metatron, the angel, and things like that. But these things are never, never, never talked about in the Christian church. And sorry, go ahead. I was just mentioning that factually, like I never heard it before in Christian school.
Yeah, he is a major figure, and of course, apart from just like wondering why he's mentioned, what his significance is, I mean, there are a lot of people who are mentioned in the Bible sort of in passing, and there's things that are said about them later that are still mysterious. I mean, you could talk about Melchizedek, you could talk about
Right, right. Great
obviously
point.
Enoch. There's a lot of, I don't want to say shadowy, but just figures that we just know tantalizingly very little about from the scripture.
Right.
They seem like very interesting people. Why don't we know more? The
Hmm.
the the truth is that the strength of this entire presentation is that there is an objective nature to it. There's something truly objective about the fact that if you are a Christian or you are an atheist, if you are a believer or a non-believer, or you are a believer of another faith or something, you still can follow the logic here. The logic of it basically states that whether you believe that Enoch is inspired or not, that seems to be Jude's assumption. He seems to be saying this in the emphatic. So whether you agree with Jude or not is a little bit beside the point. The point is that he is affirming this, whether you accept it or not, whether you believe it or not, whether it makes sense to you or not. Well, it seems like something that, because it flies in the face of church teaching, just of necessity has to be downplayed and swept under the rug. And that points to me of something a little bit in the way of dishonesty. Like a Christian almost has to be dishonest and almost has to negate Jude in order to uphold what church history has taught us. And in so doing, what you've done is you've cut yourself off from that truth, and it's been swept under the rug. And this is all stuff that lies within the canon. So it's clearly what we are supposed to know, that what we are as Christians, for example, should affirm and should believe. But it's very clearly, of all the things in the New Testament, especially, but the Bible in general, of all the things that we literally stand in the face of and disagree with God more completely on than anything else, is this teaching about this book as being ancient. Like the church literally stands against that teaching. It is not ancient. They call this like a third or second temple era writing or something from the third century BC.
Right, right.
and that
Which
it's
is impossible because Enoch is one of the specific books that mentions Jesus as the Son of Man, and a bunch of different versions of the Bible, the canon tried to remove that as being his name. They'd say the human one, or they changed it to all these different things. But first Enoch 46, 1-3 describes the Son of Man as a righteous and chosen figure. First Enoch 48, 2-6 identifies the Son of Man as a source of light and salvation. First Enoch 62, 2-5-7 portrays the Son of Man as a judge over the mighty and the unrighteous. First Enoch 69, 26-29 further underscores the Son of Man's role in executing justice and being a light to the nations. That light to the nations is what we're talking about right now, which is that, like, the Comforter will come and to lead you into all truth, which is the three testaments, Matthew 13:33. The woman, which is the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, in Hebrew it's feminine, is the one that has taken these books and hid them, and that's the like faith that we have with them, is they accepted these books back then. Jude and Peter are defending these books, although Peter's doing it nonchalantly because he had to save that secret knowledge for us in the future to know that same thing, that they crucified the word of God throughout the ages, basically.
well, what's important to know, what's important to understand, I think, is that yes, what this is doing is it's exposing the notion that this is essentially the trial of the church, whether you believe
Right.
God or you don't. And the one verse that I would look to very much in specific, and I want to stop and just focus on this for a minute, is Second Peter 1:16. If you read that, what it says is that we did not follow cleverly concocted fables when we talked to you about, or when we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. And when you realize and you recognize that that power and coming that he's talking about is Enoch 1:9, when you recognize that when he says, "Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment," right? That's the power and the coming. The He cometh to exercise judgment upon all. That's his power and his coming. So Peter is very literally saying to you that when we came to you preaching Enoch 1:9, meaning himself and Jude, he's telling you what's going on behind the scenes. He's telling you, by answering that question, he tells you the questions that they were asking. In other words, he the question was, is this book a fable or not? Is this book a pseudepigraphon or not? You literally could
Mm-hmm.
not ask for a better defense of this argument from Peter himself, because he's literally telling you that when we came to you quoting Enoch 1:9, it was not out of a pseudepigraphon, is essentially what he's telling you. He was telling you that prophets of old, right? Remember, he says that the world of old, right? That's his catch term, of old, right? Was
Yeah.
destroyed by the flood, was deluged, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then when he said, okay, so that means it's the pre-flood world, or the antediluvian world. So when
Right.
he says that the prophets of old spake as they were moved by the Spirit, he's literally telling you that prophets from antediluvian age, in other words, Enoch, that it did not come from the will of man. No prophecy of old came from the will of man, but all spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So what he's telling you is that the controversy was that number one, they questioned its antiquity. They questioned its authenticity. They insisted that it came from the will of man and was not inspired, and that it was a cleverly concocted fable. It was a falsely attributed writing, in other words. So Peter
Yep.
clears this up. So when you couple that with the recognition that Peter was the one who was given the key to bind and the key to unlock,
Right.
what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. There is this heavenly correspondence. So if that key was given to Peter, and it's Peter himself that hides that truth in that statement, when we came to you preaching Enoch 1:9, in other words, Jude and I, and probably the other apostles as well, right? But this gives you a behind the scenes. What's happening is that by looking at the questions to his answers, you can create a profile of these people. What we can therefore glean is that these people thought Enoch was a cleverly concocted fable. Peter gives us that piece. They were saying that it came from the will of man and not from the will of God, or certainly from the Holy Spirit. Peter answers that question, that no prophecy of old, of ancient times, of antediluvian times, in other words, came by the will of man, but that it was that they were that all prophets were inspired by the Holy Spirit. So basically, what they're saying is that the book of Enoch is ancient.
Hmm.
It is authentic. It is not a pseudepigraphal writing. This did not come out of some man's head. This was inspired by the Holy Spirit. It did come from an antediluvian time. He is literally saying so many things in so many words. That's what you glean.
But he's kind of saying that like these evil men have led the world astray as far as like their what they've done with the word of God, because it mentions how they foam up they're like wild waves that foam up their own shame and things like that. And then in I'm looking at Enoch, first Enoch 69:27, speaking of Jesus at the judgment. And he sat on the throne of his glory, and the sum of judgment was given unto the Son of Man, and he caused the sinners to pass away and be destroyed from off the face of the earth. So he's saying that these people he's about to mention are the sinners that are going to pass away, and the earth is going to be destroyed. And it says at the end of this, it says, and those who have led the world astray. So it's talking about whoever's leading us into a false thing. And all that really God ever talks about is his kingdom. That's all he cares about is our salvation in heaven. Not so much about our fleshly lives, but more about like don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth that where moth and rust doth corrupt and things like that. He's always telling you to point towards heavenly gold and heavenly wealth and heavenly things. You know what I mean? And I know that's a metaphor, but still, like we are living a physical existence that portrays that metaphor, like what we hope to attain in our perfection someday, type of thing. You know what I'm saying? So it's interesting that Enoch 69:27 mentions that these men have led the world astray and they're going to be judged by God for it. And that seems to be what Peter and Jude are talking about too.
Well, but see, that's the thing. In other words, it they were given power. They were given a certain length of time on Earth. This is something that's even acknowledged, for example, with the demoniacs in Gergesa or wherever that was. There's three different
Yep.
places mentioned, but the idea is that you had either one or two demoniacs, depending on how you read it. And then in one of the accounts, it says, "Have you come to destroy us before the time?" So they understand that there is an appointed time, and they understand that Jesus was somewhat before that time. So that much is given as far as their understanding. Um, the idea is that I think first of all, just parenthetically, I think the reason why you have one or two demoniacs is because they represent this age of 2,000 years. And that's why Mark adds the tidbit that there were about 2,000 of these swine. The swine are
Yep.
associated with the 2,000 years of Christendom to come. And that's why there's two demoniacs in one account because it's 2,000 years. And that's why there's one demoniac in other accounts because it's one period. So one period of 2,000 years, and there were 2,000 swine, right? So the idea is that the sow that goes back to her wallowing in the mud or wallowing in the mire or wallowing in their filth or whatever has to do with Christianity going back to the notion that the law and the prophets are the sole basis for understanding Jesus, when in fact, Jude is telling us that Enoch is part of that, that the assumption of Moses is part of that. Peter is seconding that. And he's putting it in terms where if you understand him one way, like if you see him as watering down Jude in a way, like by
Hmm.
not quoting Enoch explicitly, by being general about his reference to the assumption of Moses and so forth,
Hmm.
I think that the idea that Peter has used as sort of a watered down uh language here is him essentially playing Jude down a little bit. And I
Yep.
think that people have been very quick to jump on that presumption when in fact what he's doing is he's binding this on earth to be loosed later. Remember the way he describes it? He talks about until the day dawns and the morning star arises in our hearts. He talks
Yep.
about it as a light that's shining in a dark place. See, the idea is that his words haven't changed, but once you recognize, for example, like what I just mentioned, once you make that insight that Second Peter 1:16 is in fact him quoting Enoch 1:9. He's making reference to it. Once you realize that that is the power and that is the coming he's talking about, a light should go off in your head. Like, in other words, very literally what he's talking about here is when we came to teaching you from Enoch 1:9 that we were not following cleverly concocted fables. he's literally telling us that this is the controversy. This is what's going on. In other words, that's the first teaching. That's the first love, as it's spoken of in the Jesus's letter to the Ephesians in the book of Revelation. He talks about how they've lost their first love. So all of their doings, all of their actions were very good. They were very positive in that regard, but they lost sight of this one thing, and that led to their downfall and to their demise. So that was the first falling away, if you will. Their lampstand was taken away from them because they could not retain that first knowledge. In other words, the Enochian view of Jesus. And this is
Right.
this is another thing that's true in the there's actually a couple of things that are very interesting about the transfiguration. Number one, we know from Luke, I believe it is, they were talking about what was about to come about in Jerusalem. So they were talking about the immediacy of what was going to happen in Jerusalem. But when Peter says that, he uses Enoch's prophecy, in other words, the power and coming of the Lord. In other words, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of the saints to execute judgment. Right, the book of Enoch. He uses it in connection with the holy mountain. He says, well, we were with him on the sacred mountain. So we understand the first part of it had to do with what was immediately going to happen in Jerusalem, literally. And then we understand from Peter's piece that they also discussed the coming of Jesus in the context of Enoch. That was also discussed at the Transfiguration, apparently, because that's just taking that little piece and putting it over there in that section and looking at it
Yep.
from beginning to end. They were talking about what was going to happen in Jerusalem, and they were also talking about the power and coming of the Lord in that connection. So that's why that's what Jesus and Moses and Elijah were talking about at the Transfiguration, included the book of Enoch, apparently, if you understand that that's what that means. And so it just that one little insight pretty much ices it, because it's hard to argue against it, and I haven't talked to you about and I don't want to make this about it, but I mean, I just, for what it's worth, if anybody questions this, you can run these ideas past like even Chat GPT, artificial intelligence. And
Oh,
what
I know
I'm
it does
encouraging
work. I know.
people to do, yeah, because I know people have all kind of feelings about that, but I get it. But the idea is that they will always come back in support of this insight
Yep.
once you lead it down this path. Once you tell it, what happens if you take Jude at his word, for example? You can ask it, what happens if Jude says that, that Enoch the seventh from Adam, in other words, he's saying that it is that person at that time. Isn't that what he's saying? And it's going to come back at you with, yeah, that's what he's saying.
Yep.
If you ask it, hey, is he a prophet? Because Jude seems to be affirming that he is. Yes, he is. That's what he comes back says. So even the
Yep.
stones are crying aloud. Even a soulless machine
Right. Right.
can
Right.
affirm this, is
Yeah,
what I'm
it's
saying.
true.
So
No, I know.
just as a baseline, you could go to somebody who was a skeptic. You could go to somebody who is an atheist. You could even go to somebody who's a Christian and say, listen, this isn't just me saying this. This is the truth itself that is saying this. You know what I'm saying? It is something that once you train it to think along these lines, it will always come back to, yeah, this puts people in a double bind. Because think about what it does too. Because for the traditionalists, for example, the idea that they excluded the book of Enoch, they have to negate Jude and Peter at some point in order to maintain their position, which
Yep.
outs them, which exposes them as a basically fundamentally a yes and no person. Yes, this book is true. No, that book is not true. They're yay and nay. They're double-minded, in other words, right?
Right.
Whereas Paul, of course, he says that he's not yay and nay. He is just yay. And so if Jude is saying it and Peter is seconding it, that pretty much ices it.
Hmm.
But these three, well, those two books in particular in the New Testament, because these are things that Christians cannot set aside lightly. An atheist could seize upon this knowledge as a wedge issue to sort of, uh, chastise the church in a way, because as a former atheist, I know what I would have said. I would have said
Right.
straight up, you don't even believe your own prophets. What are you even talking about? Because I would have thrown that in their face. I really would have. And the
Right.
atheist could, but how are you going to be an atheist and realize that this happened in the church? You have to acknowledge God's power and his existence. So now
Right.
you're in a double bind because in order for you to throw that in the church's face, you have to also concede that you were wrong about it too. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's sort of a judgment upon those who disagree and for those who fight against the truth, and a vindication for those who agree with the prophets. I mean, what it says is let God be true and every man a liar. That's
Yep.
essentially what the Bible urges us to do. And so once you recognize that all you have to do is not negate them, and that is a very easy burden in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, I mean, there may be times in history where that might cost you your life, and who knows, it may even come to that,
Right.
depending on how the world reacts to this. I try not to be pessimistic about it.
No, but it does mention that we will, like, some of us are going to have our heads chopped off for for our testimony and stuff like that, and like we're going to have to go before kings and judges and whatever, like to say this stuff in front of the world. But the thing is that most Christians don't know what they're going to be saying. We know that this is what we're going to be saying is this truth, and the it says in the word that this wisdom that is given to us cannot be refuted. And if you listen to what you just said 5 seconds ago, it can't be refuted. It can't be refuted by an atheist, and it can't be refuted by a Christian that didn't have this insight in previously, because it's like a slam dunk. You can't like history already happened, and they proved their nature throughout history. They were the pigs, they were the dogs, they were the ones that had these things coming out of their mouth that were not true, and basically it's vomit. And then they find out, oh, this is true, and they don't care. They don't want this information, because this information changes your paradigm about the entire world, and you have to admit, no matter what religion you come from, that you were wrong, and that they did this to Jesus, and they did this to the word, and Jesus made it a living metaphor for what he made his human life, a living metaphor for what would happen over the time from when he was there on earth until now. And you look back and you see they did exactly what it like. You can match it up. 4th century they remove books, 16th century they remove books, and then now they're denying these same books. Like, there's even people that tell you Enoch is okay, but they won't read third Enoch. And third Enoch tells you when you get your palm branches in heaven and all these wonderful gifts that you get and stuff like that when you go to heaven. But we can't possibly read that book because we don't believe in angels, and we don't believe in, like, big fiery things of heaven. Just like in the Israelites, they were scared of God. Everybody's scared of the magnificence of God, not realizing that we are going to be like that someday. It's like you're scared of your divinity or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, that's what people are like. They're just scared of the truth. They're scared of fallen angels. They're scared of, like, giants. They're scared of all these things that they don't accept. And so they don't want to read that stuff. But it's not a fable. It's not a fable. You look at TV, it's all about giants and angels and fallen angels. You look at all the world, it's all fallen angels and demonology and stuff like that. There's no other thing out there. You know what I mean? It's either demons or aliens or angels. That's it. There's no other thing you can go to. You know what I mean?
Well, they've certainly left their stamp and their impression on everything. They the thing about it is you can focus this narrowly or you can focus this broadly. I think a lot of it, people's acceptance of it is going to be a little bit on the subjective side. Like if you paint with a really broad brush and you start bringing up all of these other books and stuff, there may be certain people that balk at that because they're afraid that you're opening up a giant can of worms.
Yeah, too
That
many
if you
things,
if
right?
you
Right.
give if they in other words in their minds if they give us an inch, then we're going to give them like 10 miles or something. And that kind of is the case because if you read the book of Enoch, it is a can of worms in a lot of regards. If you read 104 and 105, for example, he talks about how books are going to be given to the wise and to the righteous. So
Right,
it's
which it
not
says in second
solely,
second Ezra says the same thing, right?
yeah, it's not solely just the book of Enoch. Like maybe some people might find it a little bit more palatable if that was like all it was, like literally just that. They could say, "Oh, there was a book, and look at how about that," and whatever
Right,
they might.
right,
But then it's like, "Oh no, he's talking about lots of books," and that may
right.
be a bridge too far for some people mentally to accept.
But
Um,
Jesus said the more that you, like, accept, the more he will give to you. So, like, the more that you say, okay, I get this, like, oh, Enoch matches like the ascension of Isaiah, or it matches like the Gospel of Philip, or like if it all matches, it says that in a matter of two or three witnesses shall a matter be established. Now you could say, oh, well, that's talking about like two dudes said one thing, so they're in their scripture, like Peter and Jude said something, so we'll take their advice, or whatever. Well, they didn't even do that. Never mind, you know what I mean? They didn't even do that. But like, okay, let's add a third witness. So you have Jude, Peter, and Enoch, and those are three witnesses that all say the same thing, but you only accept the two, you don't accept the three, or you only accept the one, you don't accept, you know what I mean? Like that type of thing.
Well, but it what it is a refutation of 2,000 years. These people who crept in unawares had exactly the same issues with the Book of Enoch as the ministers, the teachers, the scholars, and the academics, and the skeptics do today. They have everything in common, and that's the important thing. You have to understand that we have we have been cast in the image of those infiltrators. We have accepted the canon on those terms. Um, so we have become essentially their offspring, their children. And he's renewing us. He's making us new. He's making us different. That the elect that who are to come, this book is meant to be a blessing to them. And it's supposed to open all of these doors to their perception and to their understanding. And so when you read in 104 and you read in 105 of Book of Enoch, how it talks about reveal it to them with your wisdom. You have to
Yep.
understand that these people have been given eyes to see. Like in other words, if it never occurred to you, for example, that Second Peter 1:16 is a reference to the Book of Enoch. If it never occurred to you, the moment that it does, all of a sudden it's like, that's right. That's obviously true. That's obviously the case. And he's telling you very literally in connection with that, that this is not a pseudepigraphal writing. It is not a cleverly concocted fable. So you very literally have Peter telling you that the book of Enoch is Holy Spirit inspired, because again, prophets of old, prophets of antediluvian times, in other words, because again, the world of old was flooded. So the prophets of
Hmm.
old were prophets from the world that flooded,
Right.
antediluvian, in other words. In other words, it's the book of Enoch. So they're literally telling you that it's holy writ. They're literally telling you he was a prophet, right? They're very literally telling you that the apostles themselves, at least Peter and Jude, went out preaching Enoch one night and that people question it. So you get the behind the scenes, you get the profile, and we are that profile. The church rejected Enoch just like these infiltrators did. They said that it was it came from the mind of man, just like Peter tells us that those people in the early church did. And you see, when he talks about by way of remembrance, you see how this is a way of remembrance. You see how this is knowledge because you see it. You don't just believe it, it's there. It's something that's definitive because now you can take on the whole world. Because again, even the atheist is going to have trouble denying, because they could say that the Bible is baloney. They could say what they want, right? They can come at you with that, but at the same time, it's like, but read it for what it says. What is it telling you? It's telling you that they believe that. And all that matters is that they're telling you that they believed it. And that shifts the paradigm just by itself. A
Right.
person might not like the idea that, oh, it's tons and tons and tons of different scriptures or whatever. But I think that in other words, that's what the whole idea of reading between the lines and being able to read parables is all about, because again, you have eyes to see and ears to hear, spiritual ears to hear the spiritual level of things, spiritual eyes to see the spiritual, you know things, things in terms of their spiritual significance, in other words.
Right.
So it always talks about in the book of Revelation, for example, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear, right? The idea is that you're hearing on a different level, you're hearing different things. Once you recognize that Peter and Jude are defending this, and let's go ahead and extend that then. You brought up Hebrews a minute ago. Number one, Hebrews affirms Enoch, but a person could write that off. They could say, well, he's just talking about Genesis. Okay, fine, I get it. But
Yeah.
then what about when he talks about passing through the heavens? That's
Hmm.
that's that's an allusion to the ascension of Isaiah. You go read the ascension of Isaiah. He went through the seventh heaven, the sixth heaven, the fifth heaven,
Yep.
fourth heaven, the third, all the way down. And you read that
Hmm.
from the ascension of Isaiah, and you say, well, okay, that's just parallel to some teaching that, okay, but then he talks about prophets being sawn in two. That's in the
Right.
martyrdom of Isaiah. And that's
Yep.
also in the chapter of faith. You think that's an accident that he's put that in the chapter of faith? You mean you can't get all the way through the chapter of faith, chapter 11, without denying that, for example, the woman who is going to see her children in the next world, right? That's a reference to Second Maccabees in the chapter of faith. You talk about the prophets Son and 2. He's obviously talking about Isaiah with Son and 2, right? That's also in the chapter of faith. So you have this teaching elsewhere in the Bible. It isn't limited. See, a person could try and take all kinds of defensive postures against this. Like a person might even go so far as to say, because scholars have said this, by the way, they've discounted Jude. And probably if you were going to put a gun to any theologian's head and ask them the question of which book in the New Testament has the very least credibility, they would probably say Second Peter. They would probably say that there's very few people would pick up the mantle and fight for Second Peter if they really had to, because there's so much textual and critical, disclaim of that book. And most of that arises from the fact that the argument seems to be that enough time has gone along that people are questioning the parousia, or the return of the Lord, right? Because Peter kind of betrays that. He's kind of like, where is this coming that you talked of? Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where is it? Right? And so these people jump to the conclusion that, well, that's because it was so late and the apostles had already passed on, that some would-be false scribe, right, picks up Peter's mantle and writes on his behalf, and whether his intentions are good or ill, it's still fake. And so scholars believe this and they teach this. And probably of all the New Testament writings, again, this is probably the last and the least of them in terms of its believability or credibility among scholars. People will date this into the 2nd century even. And what I'm saying,
Yeah, no, but what's ridiculous though is that this is the problem though, is that much like Christian pastors in churches today, they don't read the Bible very often. They just come up with little whimsical things to tickle the ears of whoever's listening. But okay, I'm just going to give her for instance quickly, just a for instance. Before I became a Christian, I used to read fantasy novels by this author called R.A. Salvatore, and it was about like a dark elf, and he had like a panther or some crap like that, and like that was his character that went with him or something, right? Okay, so I read 15 of these books, right? And every single book, I knew it was the author that wrote it because it's written exactly the same. That's the same thing as I'm referring to when it comes to like these books. It doesn't matter which book you pick up, you can tell that there is a metaphoric language within that specific book. If you don't even include the fact that certain books match the occurrences in other books, like for instance, Ahikar is mentioned in the book of Tobit and things like just little things like that. I'm talking about the way that it's actually written, contextually written. The angels always say the same things. They always talk about hell the same way, like in the Ascension of Isaiah. I mean the Apocalypse of Paul, where he goes to heaven and stuff like that, and he sees heaven and hell. The same exact things happen in the medieval Irish Apocrypha, which tells you about men that died and went to hell and saw the same things. That's what I'm talking about. Is like these certain books that and I'm not saying those medieval Irish apocryphal books are specifically scripture. I'm just saying that there are certain books that are scripture that are written exactly the same way. There's always the same angel, the same demon, the same thing that like stops the demon, the same thing. You know what I mean? It's always the same thing. And if you read, like, for instance, the Epistle of Barnabas, you can tell it's a Christian book that was written at the time when it was somebody that was friends with Paul type of thing. You can tell that from reading it. But then you read the gospel of Barnabas or whatever, and you can tell immediately it starts talking about Allah, and it's a Muslim book. So you know it's not what we're talking about. That's the thing that irks me the most, is that people deny Enoch. They don't even get a chapter into it before they start denying it and saying, oh, no, that couldn't possibly be true. Because for some reason, I don't know if people know this or not, but most Christians believe that in Genesis 6, that they're taught when it says the sons of God, talking about the fallen angels had sex with human women, they think that those are Seth's children that had sex with human women that created giants. That is the common theme among Christians. They think that the children of Seth are the sons of God. But I don't think that human women and human men would create giants. I think fallen angels and human women would create giants, and that's what they tell you in the book of Enoch. And it says in the Bible very clearly, we're going to be living in the days that are going to be the worst that have ever been on the face of the earth, and that it's going to be very similar to the times of Noah when Jesus returns. So what was going on back then? There was giants on the earth. So if that's the common theme in these books, is that giants are going to be on the earth, then we should probably at least read that book and find out what it's talking about, because it matches the canon. Am I wrong? Are there not things in the Bible, in the canon, that say these things?
Well, the 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 thing I always come back to as far as discernment, and I think what it is that a person who has the ability to see and to hear on the spiritual level, in other words, they have quote unquote eyes to see and ears to hear, right? They're seeing things in terms of their metaphors and in terms of their parables and in terms of a language. It's like understanding a language. Like we've gone over this on our past discussions where um I don't know if it was you in particular, but I've always talked about this in the past. We talked about how, for example, there are that we talk in metaphors, that we talk in a spiritual language, and you look for consistency along those lines. You can, if I handed you a book, like literally any book in the world, and it was in English, and I only asked you the question, is this book written in the English language, right? You could look at it and say, well, you know what, the words are intelligible. They are complete and coherent sentences. It wouldn't matter what you were talking about in terms of its content. If you were solely looking on the basis of whether it was written in English or not, you could read it. So in other words, if there is a secret language, if you will, in the gospels and in the rest of the scriptures that you're able to learn or you're able to decipher, and then if you take it over to these other books and you're able to decipher it there, what you can say is that these are written according to the same keys. These are written according to the same metaphors. These are written according to the same understanding. I can tell you that
Right.
much. And based on that, I can tell you that they were privy to this mystery. And if they were privy to this mystery, it was a mystery that was designed to be laid down and then rise back up again, like it says in Philip, or not Philip, the Gospel of Truth. It says it's
Right.
like something that falls down and easily gets set right back up. If you're
Right.
able to do that, if you're able to demonstrate that with the book, then yeah, then definitely, then it's something you can defend and it's something you can explain. Now, like I usually don't pass judgments. Usually what I will do is I will look at a book and say, I can make sense of this versus a
Mm-hmm.
book that I can't make sense of. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
just let my yay be yay and my nay be nay. Like I could take you comfortably through the gospel of truth and explain that to you. I
Yeah.
could take you comfortably through the gospel of Thomas and explain that. I could take you comfortably through Jude, through Second Peter, for example. I could take you pretty comfortably through the book of Enoch and unpack it and to a large extent explain it. And so for me, it's like it's easier for me because I feel like I have, if I have the ability to articulate it and I have the ability to demystify it, it is because it is written according to a language which once you become familiar with it, it reveals itself to you. It's about it. You have the ability to read it or you don't, but it was these people who wrote these things into those books. Like Peter was writing in a way that it could be bound on an earthly level and understood from an earthly perspective. People read Jude and Peter with the understanding that these are just general heretics, general people who
Right.
just generally don't believe, and just generally bad people. But
But
if
they're
you
not.
have
They're
eyes
very
to,
pastors. They're like the pastors of the major churches right now. That's what he's really
that's
saying.
kind of what they say. They just speak of it in terms of generality. So if they speak out of those books at all, they attribute them to just simple heretics, simple people who break into the church and say bad things or wrong things or things that are doctrinally not sound or whatever. Or they have like bad motives where they just want to make merchandise out of the church and the people there and take advantage of them or whatever. And all that's true enough. I mean, in and of itself, it's not entirely false. But once you recognize the paradigm, look, Jude is countering people and Peter is answering certain questions. What are the questions to their answers? The answer is that Enoch is the seventh from Adam. So what is the question? It's just that people are questioning it. That's all. He's fighting for the faith because they're blank, because there are people fighting against it, in other words, or people working against it, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, you're just filling in blanks here. Okay, so if he's fighting for it, it's because that blank people are fighting against it. If
Yeah, but we
he's
have
saying
that. It says that we have that like precious faith that they had back then. So if we're fighting for it now,
Mm-hmm.
we have that like precious faith. And it says
Is
that
mm-hmm.
Paul speaks the same way in all of his writings that they do. So it means that that code that Jude and Peter are talking about is also in all of Paul's writings.
Yeah.
And that's that code that you're talking about.
Yeah. Now, I don't insist that Paul wrote Hebrews because I don't know for sure. He
Well,
doesn't claim it, but it wouldn't be entirely impossible. But I mean, there are other candidates. There's Apollos, there's Clement, there's Barnabas, of course, as potential candidates for having written that book. I'm not going to argue that, but the idea that these books are spoken of in Paul, for example, he talks about that Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light, right?
first
Which he
book of
gets
Adam and Eve.
from, yeah, which he gets from the life of Adam and Eve.
Yep.
So, in other words, when Peter's saying, listen, it's not just me, right? It's not just us, right? It's Paul too. Look, Paul's writing the same way in all of his books, speaking in them of these things. So
Right.
he's opening that door too. See, he's unlocking all of these keys. He's unlocking all of this stuff because he was given the key. He was given the key to bind and to unbind. I know I keep saying that.
Yeah,
It's
no, I know,
important to
yeah,
recognize that
but
because
but
now you see what it is.
but in the Bible, Jesus mentions these hidden things that are going to be given to us. Hidden, hidden, hidden. He says it a million times. Hidden. If you look it up, how many times he says hidden. And apocrypha means hidden. So if apocrypha means hidden, and just mentioning the 14 apocryphal books that were originally in the King James Bible in 1611, if we just take those 14 apocryphal books, one of them is Maccabees that you already mentioned, which is about the woman and her children that it alludes to or whatever. The other one is second Esdras, which tells you that certain books are going to be for the wise and some of them are going to be for the wise and the unwise. So the canon is for all people to read, and
Mhm.
other books are only for the wise to read because they're not going to take it and abuse it. They're going to take it and shed it, to shed that light out to the world. You know what I mean? And they have to be, it's actually a big responsibility because you're constantly telling people about these books that they do not read and they do not give any credit to. And it says, how many times does it say, like, don't put your light under a bushel or under a basket or whatever? Don't put your light under this. How many times does it say in the Bible, don't let your light be extinguished, like type of stuff? It says it constantly. And yet we do that by negating these books that Jesus said, I will give to you to eat of the hidden manna. Hidden
Mhm.
manna is what apocrypha literally means hidden. How can you screw that up? I don't like that's impossible to screw something so simple up that Jesus refers to these books so many times. Like it's almost like the canon and especially the New Testament, because the Old Testament was like referring to Jesus, but Jesus was referring to the Ruach HaKodesh, the Comforter coming in the future. And it's almost like the whole New Testament is a defense of like these books that were removed. That's what I feel like. It's like all pointing to that. I've always felt that way since I found this
There,
out.
there are lots of places where you have to look at it as I think that these things are there and they're very much unacknowledged. And
Right.
the the fact that it's swept under the rug instead of pointed out by a lot of Bibles and stuff intrigues me. Like, for example, when you read James, for example, he makes an offhanded remark about, that does not the scripture say that the spirit within us lusteth to envy, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, but that's not from the law and the prophets, in other words. That's not from the canonical Old Testament as we understand it. Now, I don't think that source exists. I've never come across it myself, but he's obviously talking about something outside of the canon as scripture because he
Hmm.
uses the word scripture in connection with that. And it doesn't seem to be a real paraphrase of anything. It seems to be he's quoting something outside of scripture. So that's something. There's other places, like, for example, in Matthew, where it says that, he was born in Nazareth to fulfill the prophecy that he shall be called a Nazarene, right? Well, that doesn't really refer to anything specific in the Old Testament. Some people think it bears some resemblance to verses here and there, but the idea is that it's not a dead on, you know, verbatim quote of anything in the Old Testament. And so the idea is that they're always painting outside of these canonical boundaries. That it takes a little bit of you imposing the idea that it's solely the law and the prophets. It's not something that emerges from the text, it's something that's imposed upon the text. And so
Yep.
because it comes from the mind of man, and it comes from the presumption that men make. I mean, clearly, I mean, thinking as a skeptic, as an atheist, right? Even now, as somebody who tries to be objective about things, like I try not to speak to things that I can't speak to, because I just don't want to make things up. I want my yay to be yay and my nay to be nay. And if I say something, I want to be able to point to something and say, that's why I say it. I don't want to be just talking out of my head, making stuff up or just telling you what I think. I want to tell you what I can defend. Right. And
Right.
so that's always been my approach. And I think it's kind of kept me out of trouble, at least in terms of narrowly speaking, the scriptures, because
Right.
by sticking to what and by keeping to what you can defend, you narrow down what people might come against you with.
Right.
You stay on a relatively solid ground. It's very, very clear that what happened was that these people came up to Jude with questions about the authenticity of the Book of Enoch. What happened was, behind the scenes, Peter and Jude and probably the rest of the apostles were out there teaching from the Book of Enoch. We find evidence of this elsewhere. For example, Paul is always running into people that he sort of chastises as the super apostles or whatever, the apostles that think they're better than he is. And every once in a while, he'll go on a tangent about, you know, oh, well, they regard my appearance and my speech as mean and barbaric or whatever, that I write all these weighty things in my letters, but when I get there, I'm not, impressive or whatever, and
Yeah. Yeah.
vaunt themselves over me and stuff like that. They're painting a picture of all of these false apostles. John does the same thing in Third John. He actually talks about Diotrephes, right, as being somebody who would not let him or any of his followers into his church. In other words, so now you have the very apostle John, who laid his head on Jesus's breast, rejected by the church, the early church. So you have a situation that they're telling you about in the New Testament where before they were even dead, before their bodies were even cold, you had people who were trying to usurp them. And what I think it was is that it just seems to be so obvious at this point, after having thought about it for so many years, really decades, trying to piece it together in my head, that they went out preaching the Jesus of the Book of Enoch, along with the 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 law and the prophets. Because what you see is that the teaching is to eat what they place before you and heal the sick among them, right? So what are they placing before you spiritually? The food that they place before you spiritually would be the law and the prophets.
The hidden manna,
Teach them
basically.
out of that because that was what they already believed. All
Hmm.
right. And so a lot of what you see seems to bear the stamp of it only being the law and the prophets. But every once in a while, you come across a verse like we talked about in Matthew, like we just talked about in James, that seems to be coming from somewhere else. You look at Hebrews, that's clearly from the Assumption of Moses, that's clearly from the second book of Maccabees. Those are clear allusions. And sometimes, every once in a while, you'll find a Bible that actually owns some of this stuff. You'll look at
Yep.
the footnote, and occasionally you'll read something like, oh, Jude 14 and 15 cited from the non-canonical Book of Enoch. And sometimes they'll even go so far as to say things like, well, just because he believed it or whatever doesn't mean, anything, or, those
Yeah.
words to that effect, negating it, right? There's a little bit of fraud in that. And when I see something like that, part of me wants to laugh and part of me wants to cry, because it's just like, how
Yeah.
can you believe that? And
Yeah.
yet, of course, you're living in a world where obviously people have been influenced by those teachings, and they've been negated. But
Now
yeah,
people take
there's so many anomalies that I would hate to even call them anomalies. They are common. These references to these books are common.
But the only thing that people use for a rebuke of going, so you've mentioned it in one of your previous videos, but like it says in the book of Revelation that if anybody takes away from this book, that they will have all the plagues of Egypt or whatever upon them for taking away the words of this book, the prophecy of Revelation or whatever. So people say that if you like add books to the Bible, you take any books away, that you're going to have all these plagues. I've heard you say that before too. Like whenever like you're saying, oh, have you read the book of Enoch? People are like, oh no, I can't read that. It's not in the canon. I can't read that because I'll get all the plagues of Egypt. Like I've heard people say this before. Like you know what I mean? Like
Well, who's
that's what
canon?
Christians really think. Christians
Which
really think
one?
that. What do you say?
I said, who's canon? Which one?
Yeah, no,
What
I
are you
know they're all
talking about?
different.
You talking about the Catholic one? He's talking about I mean, what about the Ethiopic canon?
Well,
they got Enoch in there.
I'll say it like this. I'll say it like this. I live in New England, and I've gone to churches on the whole entire East Coast of the United States, and nobody will read anything if it's not the 66 book canon like of America. They say, like that's
Well,
pretty strict. Like,
but again, he tells you to eat what they place before you and heal the sick among them.
right.
They will place the book of Hebrews before you. They will put the book of James before you. They will bring Matthew to you. They will bring reluctantly, perhaps. They have no choice but to bring Jude and Second Peter before you, right? So the idea is that you're able to eat of what they eat, so to speak, spiritually.
Show
And
them the
then
things that are in the other books that
heal,
match these
yeah,
books
the
and stuff.
spiritually sick among them. That's
Yeah.
what this is it's a healing. See, Peter talks about this in very specific ways because I think I keep going back to that, but it's important to understand that he's really the linchpin here.
Yeah.
He's the one who's taken the book of Jude. So evidently the book of Jude arose out of a controversy where he was answering certain questions. People had questions. People probably were making assertions, and I have a strong sense that if you read the seven letters of the Church of Revelation, for example, there's some deep mysteries here, and I've gone over some of those during the teachings that I've had at the King of Saints Church. If you go read the Revelation series or whatever, you'll see more of what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
That the seven churches are basically the churches more or less in order,
Hmm.
and that the Church of Ephesus first of all loses its first love, and once you recognize that these people read these books and that was what was lost. So despite all of their good works and despite all of their hard work and everything, just that alone caused them to lose their footing. They lost their lampstand because again, the lamp is not designed to be put under a bushel. A bushel is a container, same as a cannon. A cannon is basically just a container of books, a box, a bucket, whatever you want to say. It sort of
That's so
contains it.
weird. So weird. That's
Yeah,
so weird.
it
No.
shows you that, and you're not supposed to take that light. Now, what does Peter or say about it, his own teaching? He says that it is a light shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in our hearts. So, what's the dark place? It's our
Our heart.
hearts because it's
Yeah.
dark until what? The day dawns and the morning star arises.
Right.
So the light is shining in that dark place, even though it is a dark place, right? Because they've taken the lamp, which is the word. Thy lamp is a word, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. See, that's the language, right? So if his word is a lamp, right, and I think it says that several places. I think one of them is in Proverbs even. Um, it makes that metaphor. So you understand that the lamp has to do with the word. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. So a light shining in a dark place is the word shining in the dark place, right? Um, the people who have oil in their lamp and the people who don't have oil in their lamp, the wise and the foolish, right? The idea is that they don't have the spirit in what they read, so that there's no fuel, there's no burning, if you will, and so their lights have gone out. But the book of Jude and the book of Second Peter have been sitting there all this time, and unless and until you make that connection that his power and his coming in Enoch, or sorry, in Second Peter 1:16 is in fact the quote of Enoch 1:9. It is an allusion to that. Once you make that connection, everything becomes crystal clear because he's literally telling you that the book of Enoch is simply not a pseudepigraphon. He literally
Yeah, and let me read Ephesians 4:14. It kind of refers to this in the code within it. You can speak on it if you want to, Robert. But then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, which the waves are doctrines, whether they're true or false, I guess, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching. See, it tells you what it is, and by the cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. And that's from Ephesians 4:14. And then we go down to Jude 1:13. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame, wandering stars for whom blackest darkness has been reserved forever. Now, pausing on those two, there were many references where Peter, who represents the Christians in the Christian church, is out upon the waves. He's on the water and he has no faith, and the waves are contrary to him, the winds are contrary to him, and things like that. So right there you can see in Ephesians, in Jude, and in all the basically almost every instance where Peter, a fisherman, is on the water, and Jesus has to either come out to him and save him, or he has to come out and do all these things to help him and stuff like that, or his faith is tested and Jesus is sleeping, things like that. So if you notice that stuff, it's not coincidental. These are keys that are written into these scriptures, and this is what me and Robert are referring to when we talk about the keys of the kingdom and the things that Peter shut up so no man could open type of thing. Sorry, go ahead, Robert.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, okay. So there are two specific instances of Jesus in the boat and the disciples, for example, where there is the storm. Let's say
Yep.
there are these infiltrators of the church. They are the double-minded, because James kind of uses the metaphor too. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, like the waves of the sea or whatever. Um, um, and that the waves very specifically refer to these infiltrators of the church and their instability and their chaos and whatever, and their teachings or whatever. And the winds, of course, are the doctrines that they're teaching. So when Peter, um, who basically represents the church, I mean, we've talked about this too, where you had James, Peter, and John at the Transfiguration. Peter talks about three tabernacles, in other words, three congregations, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. So the one for Moses would be for Judaism, one for Jesus would be for Christianity, and then the one for Elijah is to come and set all things right. So he's talking about three different, congregations, if you will, three different revelations, three different. So Peter represents the church. So as long as Peter, for example, keeps his eye upon the Logos, he's able to transcend the winds and the waves, and he's able to approach the Logos. And as soon as he takes his eyes off of the Logos and looks at the false teachings and these infiltrators, right? Then he sinks into the sea, which is the age, because again,
Right.
it's from one end to the other. Now, as soon as the Logos, as soon as Jesus pulls him out of the world, which is the sea, right? The nations, the peoples, the tongues, and the kings, right?
Right.
Then they enter into the boat and they immediately arrive at the port at which they were for which they were heading or whatever, which
Right.
basically means that that's the whole thing, is to get the Logos, if you will, into the boat with you. And then there's another instance where he's already in the boat, he's down in the stern, and then
Yep.
everybody's freaking out. Oh my goodness, well, look at all the waves, look at all the winds, don't you care, we're all going to die here.
Matthew
Then
eight
he
twenty
comes
four, I think.
out and he rebukes them, and he rebukes the winds, he rebukes the waves, and then he rebukes the apostles. He says, "Listen, why is it that you couldn't do this, right?" Which
Right.
really what he's saying is you can do this. You see, this is case in point. This is what we can do. We can point out that Second Peter and Jude are right and that these people are wrong. And that's an important thing to understand and to have in your mind, is to recognize that by means of the Logos you have the ability to walk on the water, so to speak, to transcend the age, to transcend all of this. Understanding what we're talking about now gives you that ability to transcend it, and also it gives you the ability to rebuke the wind, and it gives you the ability to rebuke the waves, because again, this whole teaching is set against those infiltrators of the church, along with their false doctrines, the winds and the
Right. And
waves.
just a side note also is that Jesus mentioned that in some of the books in the Nag Hammadi codices, he said that the disciples asked him, "How do we defeat the fallen angels? How do we conquer the fallen angels?" They call them the archons. And Jesus said, by this very teaching that we're teaching right now, you need to defeat anger. And to defeat anger, you need to have a love for your neighbor and a love for your fellow man, whether your enemy or your friend. You're supposed to love everyone. And that's why I'll talk about that part later, but that's why he chastised Philip when he was dying, because you're supposed to love your enemies. You're not supposed to curse your enemies. Like Jesus said, to forgive them, for they know not what they do. So we're supposed to be doing that same thing. And so in order for us to overcome the fallen angels, we need to preach the gospel, and it's this gospel, the true gospel, not like what the church has been teaching for these past 2,000 years, basically. Go ahead, Robert.
So yeah, so in other words, once you recognize that the light has been shining in this dark place, again, for these 2,000 years, the words have remained unchanged. What has changed, right? Is that the morning star has arisen in your hearts, and he gives you the timetable. A day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as a day. All these people were complaining about the timetable. And Peter basically tells you essentially that it's 2,000 years away. Same as Barnabas, really, because the the idea is that they knew that they were right around the 4,000 year mark. and that there were another 2,000 years to come. That's why you know about the 2,000 pigs. That's why you understand about the two demoniacs or the two angels or whatever at the tomb. Why there's sometimes a difference, a discrepancy between one and two, because it's one age, 2,000 years. And the idea is that there's times and there's times where there's a time, there's times, and then there's half a time. A time is 2,000 years. A half a time is 1,000 years, and times is 2 times 2,000 years, or 4,000 years. So the age is broken down into 4,000 years, then 2,000 years, then 1,000 years. That's 1,000. That's 7,000 years. And so when the day dawns, it is that 7,000th year. So he's telling you that it's 2,000 years in the future. He literally gives you those data points.
Which is
And
the Sabbath, which is when they said, it says you don't sin on the Sabbath. It's saying don't commit sin because don't do what you hate on the Sabbath,
well,
which
what you're
we
supposed to do is you're supposed to heal on the Sabbath. You're
right,
supposed to
because
open up people's eyes.
that's what Jesus was
That's
doing,
the
and that's
work
why
you're
they killed him.
supposed to do. It's not that
Right,
you're
right,
supposed to be idle. It's that you're supposed to be doing his work because you're in his employ and you're doing his job. You know what I'm
right.
saying? And
Absolutely.
that's the thing.
Very well said, Robert. That was a great point. Great point.
But I mean,
Absolutely.
but that's what we're. But see, that's why it's a blessing for what? The elect. There's 10,000s of us. In other
Yep.
words, it sort of speaks of this as being a ground level, grassroots kind of thing. Like somebody might be listening in Zanzibar for all I know, and then the light will go off in their head and they'll go speak to somebody and that,
Right.
it'll gain life over there. Somebody else might be somewhere else and they might be able to do grassroots things over there. They do things with their YouTube channel, or they might have a talent. Maybe
It's like the
they can
mustard seed
contribute.
thing. Something tiny turns into something big, right?
But hand to the plow.
Right.
Put your hand to the plow and don't look back. You got nothing to look back on. Nothing in this age is really worth salvaging because it was written off, it was lost. The only thing that's going to last,
Is this
honestly, I don't think the person would be transformed. I think if a person listened to this and they had no idea what we were talking about, and all of a sudden the light went off in their head, I would imagine there would be people whose lives would be changed by this, because I know mine would. If I had stumbled across this knowledge and somebody had the ability to kind of lay it out and maybe spoon feed me it a little bit, that the light would go off in my head. Because once you make certain connections, once you make certain insights, once you recognize that certain things are true, um, you can't unsee them. You can't disregard them in the future. And that's the thing. He talks about he's going to give us a mouth and a wisdom that no one will be able to deny or to withstand. And it literally means nobody, because like I said before, the one thing that's really powerful about speaking these things is that you could speak them to an atheist, you could speak them to a person of a different faith. I think the people you might have the hardest time with are the traditionalists or the Christians themselves. They may be the last people to really come around on this,
I agree.
because there is an objective nature to it. There is something about it that is just true in itself. And I think that that's the thing. He talks about it for being for the Jews and for the Greeks, or for being, for believers and the unbelievers. It is a gospel for the whole world. It is a teaching for the whole world. And that's because it's true in and of itself. It doesn't need anybody's permission to be true. It is concealed in our own delusion of it, because we've created a fabrication, in order to sort of sweep these things under the rug. A fiction had to be sort of created around the book of Jude and its purpose. A fiction sort of had to be created around Second Peter and its purpose. And it's interesting how those two books, for example, are even separated in the canon. How you have Second Peter, and then you have First, Second, and Third John, and then you have Jude, right? As if to say they didn't even want those two books to be written or read together. Like, in other
Right.
words, they really didn't want you thinking about it or putting two and two together when it came to that. Um, but the idea is that when you do, and when you do recognize it, then all of a sudden, all of these little subtle deceptions sort of appear to you, like the sort of the subtle deception of putting the books apart so that you would read them separately, that you would sandwich, the letters of John in between them, let's say, and then put the book of Revelation right after it so that maybe you might skip over it, or not put as much emphasis on it because the next book or whatever is more important or something. I think it was de-emphasized by being placed as the next to the last book in the Bible.
Yeah, but I gotta say though, it is kind of crazy that you figured out you could combine Second Peter and Jude like how many years ago, and now we have Chat GPT, and like if you type in combine Second Peter and Jude, it comes up with it like within 1 second. But you did that freehand, like like you didn't even have it.
Well,
Oh, like the Holy Spirit told you how to do it. That's it. That's crazy.
well, the thing about it is that the combining of them is one thing. Just reading them together, just reading them side by side is just as valid. And
Oh, I
people
know.
have been,
It's
people have
crazy.
been able to do that for a long time. I mean, it's not something that people haven't done. I'm not even going there. I mean, you could go to a Christian bookstore, you could go online and find commentaries where Second Peter and Jude exist within the same bound. Like how you can go on, you can buy commentaries on each of the books, you can buy
Yeah,
Matthew
yeah,
separate from John, separate from, whatever. And usually Second Peter and Jude are bundled together. In terms of those things, usually you'll get Second Peter with Jude if you buy them separate like that. Sometimes you
yeah.
don't,
But how could they
but
do that for so long and never come to these conclusions before? Like that's well, I guess it speaks to that it was never meant to be until now. But it's just it's just crazy. Nobody ever
well, it
noticed it.
shows the power of God.
Yeah,
It shows his ability to hold the truth back. See, I keep going back to the light that's shining in the dark place. Those words were always there to be seen, to be discovered. Those things, but the key thing is that a day is going to come when those mysteries will be open to us and they'll be available to us. And Peter tells us very much that we have the power to speed his coming, literally to speed his coming. In other words, to these are the tools that he gives us to do that. In other words, once you take what he's bound on earth and you're able to use his key to unbind it, right? And then thereby unbind what is in the heavens. Once you have that, then you can speed his coming because now you've been given a key. Now you've been given something that literally unlocks the heavens. And he's given us that. Really, really, Jesus has given us that because he gave it to Peter to give to us. You can only assume that Peter was written under inspiration of the Holy Spirit because what he intended to do did in fact have its intended effect. And like I said, you could feed it. Like I said, I keep going back to ChatGPT, but you could feed it through that. Like I could start off with a totally blank conversation, and then just start talking about look at what's written in Jude, right?
yeah.
What
No, I
are
know.
what are
I've
the
gone through it. It's
implications of
crazy.
that? What are the
It's crazy.
implications of that book being brought to Peter with these questions? Right? He answers questions. What are the questions to those answers? He says the answer is that no prophecy of old came about by the will of man. So what is the question? Did prophecies from the time of the flood, before the time of the flood, did they come from the mind of man? Right? He's saying no, they didn't. Right? Were these books that when you came to us speaking about the power and coming of our Lord, in other words, when you taught the book of Enoch to us, was this not a pseudepigraphon? Was this not a cleverly concocted fable? Peter's answer is no, no, it's not a cleverly concocted fable. We were with him on the sacred mountain where this was all discussed and laid out. That's what
Yeah.
he says. And he
Yeah,
literally
no, but
says,
people could say though, well, I like I've heard people say to this argument that like, why do we care so much about what happened pre-flood? Like if it, and there's several
well,
references where I could fight that. Like
why
one
did
is,
mhm.
sorry, go ahead, just go ahead.
Why did it matter that Adam and Eve ate the apple? the,
Right,
the,
right. That's
the
what I'm saying. I know. Yeah,
what
but Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, when they asked him what is it going to be like in the end, he's like, do you know the beginning that you're asking about the end? So right there, Jesus is saying you're giving a lot of importance on the end when you don't even know the beginning yet. And so he says that to all the disciples, which represents all of us basically. So that's one instance. Then it says, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. So that's right there talking about the days of Noah. So it's going to be like the days of Noah when Jesus returns. So we should know about the past right there. That's another one. But that's just two. But go ahead. I want to hear what you're going to say.
oh well I mean, the thing about it is that it's important because everything he says is important. I mean, we don't live by bread alone, but by every word
Every
that
word.
comes out. And until you are willing and able to acknowledge everything he says, remember what I was saying before about the kind of Christian deception that exists when, and it's always been a pet peeve of mine too, by the way, um, is that when you come across these instances, only very rarely are they ever mentioned in the footnotes. It's as if they just want you to not see that. It's as
Right.
if they just want you to not catch that. Because and especially books with extensive notes or extensive concordances, that that it's one thing to not have any kind of concordance in it. Okay, fine, I get it. You're just presenting it as it is. Okay, I get that. But at the same time, when you put the concordance in it, or when you put the footnotes in it, why are you going to be selective here? Why are you going to and essentially let people continue to believe what is incorrect? When Paul, for example, talks about how Lucifer is himself changed into an angel of light, right? How Satan, whatever, the devil. The fact that you don't point out that that's from the life of Adam and Eve leads people astray. When Jude quotes explicitly the book of Enoch and you gloss that over and you say either nothing or you say the bare minimum, like cited from I read once that just said cited from the non-canonical book of Enoch 1:9, I think is all it said. So it
Hmm.
was only as honest as it really had to be in addressing that issue. It only said what the bare minimum you could say of it was essentially and still not be called on it. And so the idea is that it just was sort of avoided. I've read a lot worse where it literally went into excruciating detail about how this doesn't mean that he believed the book was inspired or whatever, or that it was
Yeah,
just
yeah. That,
popular culture or something
that's the
as
only
we usually
argument though they
understand.
ever have. It's not even a good argument.
Yeah, but I mean, especially when prefaced by the idea that he calls him the seventh from Adam, right?
Yeah. Tells you
When he
exactly who
says
he
that he
was.
prophesied, I mean, a person could kind of blow off Paul's allusions to Menander because, first of all, Paul kind of disowns him a little bit himself. He says, according to their prophets, which is true, that the Cretans or whatever, the
Yeah, I know, but
idea.
it says in Jude and it talks about this in Peter, and I know this isn't talking about the metaphoric sense, but we I don't I know you talked about this with Zen, and but I do think it has importance, is that Jesus said to understand the wheat and the tares parable like is paramount before you can understand all other parables. And
Right.
so if you understand that Cain is Satan's son with Eve, that's the only way that Cain wouldn't be included in Jesus's genealogy. So Cain's firstborn son was Enoch, and he was a wizard. So a lot of times you mention Enoch, and people are like, "Oh no, he was evil." Well, you don't know the genealogies well enough, and that's why Jude says Enoch seventh from Adam, because if you say Enoch and you don't say seventh from Adam, it could have been the evil one, which was Cain's firstborn son, because it mentions it clearly in the Bible and in Jasher and some other books or whatever and stuff like that. So like you need to know that there are people, it says this literally in Jude, certain men crept in unaware. These men were of old, it says, and like stuff like that. It's talking about the ancient, like, so it's telling you to go back and look, well, who is it and why? And Enoch's Cain's firstborn Enoch, he did magic, and there's even books today that have the name of Enoch on the front of the book, and it's a book about magic. Like, and that's why, is because it was Cain's son, not Enoch seventh from Adam. And I think that's super important just to mention that whenever we talk about this, because people use that against Enoch, but it's not
Yeah,
the
that's
same
like the
Enoch.
confusion you were talking about earlier between the Epistle of Barnabas and the Gospel of Barnabas. People,
Right.
you got to make those distinctions because yeah, there is that, and I don't think that's without reason. I mean, if you believe
Right.
that the angels are real, I mean, remember it says that demons believe also and tremble. The
Right. They
idea
did this on purpose. Yeah.
they know that there is a coming day. They understand that Jesus, quote unquote, came before the time, as they put it.
Mhm.
That's given to us to know that they have a certain level of understanding about these things. And so for them to take the book of Enoch and try, or not the book of Enoch, the name of Enoch,
And
and
try to
try to
make it like a
stoke
bad thing.
confusion to try to
Right.
sow discord, to try to make something, evil out of it,
Right.
almost to be expected. And certainly
Right.
shouldn't be surprised by it. So I mean, the fact is, yeah, we are talking about two distinct things here. And
Well, the other thing that we talk about all the time, like in churches and stuff like that, I just want to mention this, is that we always talk about the lives of the people that are patriarchs. Like Abraham was holy because of this, this, and this. Jacob was holy because of this, this, and this. Joseph was holy for the whatever he did, his attributes and things. And maybe Samson, he had some good stuff, but he also fell away. Solomon, he had some good stuff, but he fell away. Things like that. We say what kind of a man he was. If you read about what kind of man Enoch was, he would go away for almost a year alone just to be with God, to
Mhm.
meditate on the Lord and spend time with him. And you really, if you read Enoch, you find out what kind of a man he was. And he was always questioning the angels about things that were important to him. And they were always like righteous things. He always wanted to know, why is this way? And it was always a righteous thing. Like you literally can hear how righteous Enoch was as a person, and why God chose him as the one to come up to heaven and learn and to be an angel Metatron, and to like do all, like be a part of heaven. He went straight to heaven to be a part of heaven. God didn't choose many people to do that. You know what I mean? So if we are going to like bow down and say like to a person someday, like if you see Moses someday and he's so bright that you're like, oh my goodness, and you're like, whoa, dude, like, to say hi to him. Enoch is one of those types of people. And I think as human beings, if once you realize who he was, you should at least in your mind give him some respect as to God chose this person. You know what I mean? That's
Mhm.
important in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly valid. I mean, there are all of these implications, and really, there's a lot that's kind of said about it. If you delve into a lot of these apocryphal writings, there's a lot of talking about Enoch. There's talk about him um, as being one of the witnesses, and so on and so forth. That I mean, there's
Yeah.
there's lots of sources that talk about that, and it's certainly understandable. Um, what what Peter and Jude give us, if I haven't beat it into the ground already, but what they give us is a means of the return of this book. This book says that it's made to be a gift, if you will, a blessing for the elect and righteous,
Mhm.
and a tool for the removal of the wicked and the ungodly.
Right.
We've understood that we share the same paradigm that those people had. We consider the book of Enoch to be fake the same way that the early infiltrators of the church did. We as
Robert,
a church,
Robert, can I ask
uh
something? Would you say, if you could, I don't want to put a perfect title on it type of thing, but if you could say this, would you say that Jude, I don't know how you say it, but like Jude is the lock, Peter is the key, or something like, or what, however you put it. Would you say that they are that for opening up the third testament, the
yeah.
Holy Spirit's testament? Is that
Mhm.
okay? Or okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because well, I would say that, like, to my way of thinking, Jude is just as much a key as Peter is,
Right, right,
in a
right.
lot
Okay.
of
Yep.
regards. Because
Right.
because like I said, go to ChatGPT, ask it a very simple question. What happens to the concept of Christianity if you simply take Jude at his word? You just simply ask it that, and then give it some examples. Like literally say, listen, what if the faith that he's telling you to fight for is these books that he keeps quoting? The Assumption of Moses, the Book of Enoch. If you lead it a little bit, and again, I understand that you're leading it, but by and large, if you give it enough information to work with, it'll come back with reaffirmations of what you're saying.
Right.
And I
Right.
get
Very
that. I
detailed
get
too.
that
Very detailed.
that ChatGPT to a large extent will quote unquote hallucinate. I get it. They will give you will for the most part give you confirmation bias if you come at it with questions as if you were a Mormon, or if you came at it with questions as if you were a Catholic or whatever. It would probably give you answers that are in keeping with
Yeah, but
your
you
belief system.
just on a side note, you can I logged into my account. My wife uses it for like work and stuff like that. So I logged into my account through
Mhm.
myself, the Carpenter's son, and I prefaced it on all future answers. Answer as if there is no Christian bias against certain apocryphal books. I want like an open canon. I want you to answer all my questions as if the Old Testament, New Testament, apocrypha, and pseudepigrapha are all considered scripture. I don't want to hear your bias anymore. And it won't now. It doesn't even answer me in a biased tone. It's incredible.
Yeah,
But
I
sorry,
mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, and again, I got to caution against a certain level of confirmation bias. But see,
Right.
what I will tend to do is I will give it leading information. Like I will tell it, for example, what happens if you view Second Peter 1:16 as if it were a reference to Enoch 1:9, and it sees that, like it understands that, and then you really can't even argue against it. Like if you say, okay, now I'm a skeptic and I'm going to try to come against you with a skeptic's point of view, right? You try to put it
Yeah.
on the and it'll still come back to me where, it still puts you in a double bind as a skeptic because it puts you on the other side of this line, as somebody who's questioning it. And so,
Right.
and what I'm saying is that, how Jesus says that, if these people will not proclaim it, even the stones themselves will cry aloud. The
Yeah.
idea is that I think that metaphorically he's talking about the stones as in the testaments or whatever, his words,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But by extension, you're talking about a soulless computer. You're talking about a soulless machine that's
Right.
just digging through data and trying to make human logic out of the data, if you will,
Right.
that it's
Yeah, and
presented
to be
with.
honest, in my opinion, it's a lot more unbiased than it would be if you got it from a human
That's what
pastor
I'm
who
saying.
has
A
like
person
thousands of years of like,
like like
sorry, go ahead.
No, like if you were in a debate, like if you were to even see, like just as a moderator, like I don't know that we're 100% there yet because, like I said, GPT is still will hallucinate, will sometimes give you wrong answers and stuff like that. You got to take it with a grain of salt. I'm not
Yeah,
saying to blindly believe anything. Educate yourself more so than anything. Be
but
grounded in your own faith. But
it is a great study tool though, because it brings up verses that like if you just type in two words and you can't remember what it was that the verse you wanted to bring up was, it'll bring up the not only that verse but like eight other ones that refer to that, and that's just basic info you could just get from a Google search, but it's coming in. It's written contextually, so you can use it for some like study tools and things like that. It's
you
nice.
can
It's a nice
basically
feature.
have a conversation with it. You push the little
Right, right.
microphone button, you could talk for 10 minutes, you could ramble for 10 minutes, and then, it'll come back with an answer and you can listen to it. So you're just literally having a conversation with this thing. And it's ubiquitous. You could be just anywhere. But I'm just telling you, it always comes back with this as being true. And so, I've tried to argue against it. And so I'm thinking as a moderator, like if you were in a debate with somebody, like in the future sense, like if you imagine a forum where you had atheists and you had textual critics or just people with those arguments, let's say, and you had this as a moderator, as an objective sort of outside moderator, you would get
Right,
this answer, you would get
right,
this response. And if you simply asked it to affirm what these people are saying and give credence to what they're saying, you could ask it, well, is this thing in Hebrews, does it bear significant allusions to the the ascension of Isaiah, for example? Yes, it does. You could ask it, does what Paul is saying over here, does this align what's written in the life of Adam and Eve? Yes, it does. What about what James is saying in 4:5? Yes, it does. It'll just go on and affirm this stuff. And
right,
so really you could appeal to an independent arbiter in all of this. It's sort of like the writing is on the wall, so to speak, because
right,
you would think that from this time forward, it won't just be about what he says or she says or what you believe or what I believe. It's about what is written. And that's what makes it very interesting because, like I said, you don't have to be a believer to understand how to read. You don't have to be a believer to understand the implications of something that somebody says. I could sit down with a book that I totally disagree with, and I can come up with reasons why they're right or why they're wrong or whatever on my own without having to buy into everything they say. But
right,
the problem comes when you don't buy into everything that the Bible has to say. That's where the problems arise. If you buy everything that the Bible has to say in total, right? These are certain inevitable conclusions that you can draw, and that, like I said, an objective arbiter would have to agree with, um, would have to sort of back you up on. And that's
Yeah,
what
because
it is.
all it's doing is taking puzzle pieces of facts and putting them in like all in a row. It's not like saying, "Oh no, this is because of this." It's just literally facts, and it's just like right in front of you in a column. It's not. It's nice, honestly. It's a good way to study the Bible, in my opinion.
So for everybody who's out there, I mean, every one of you who's out there, understand that number one, just on your phone, and everybody here probably has a phone, just on your phone, you could have this. You could talk to people. You could talk to them on the bus. You could talk to them, on the street corner. You could talk to them at work. You could talk to them at church. You could talk to them wherever you happen to be. And like I said, you could show them even using that app, but I mean, you have the power to speed his coming. I keep going back to that. That's what he says, that once you understand the timetable, once you understand how he's a light shining in a dark place, once you understand how the wicked are reserved for judgment and all of this, once you recognize how the axe is laid at the roots of the tree, so to speak, once you recognize that every single one of us will do better than Jesus did because he's given us that power, better than John the Baptist did because he's given us that power. We're talking about ending this whole world situation. We're talking about handing the keys of the kingdom back to the king, and letting him reign on this earth. He doesn't need our permission, but somehow this goes through us. Again, we have the power to speed his coming, right? So, in other words, a lot of this is on us. I mean, the onus, if you will, is on us. You mean it's funny how that works because it's ON and then US, so it's on us, so to speak. But for whatever it's worth, he's given us the tools to do this. You could call it keys, you could call it locks. It was locked up, but now the cat's out of the bag. I mean, it really is within your power to do something about it. It really
Yeah,
is
but
within your power to make it happen, to
in
speed
in
is coming.
in general terms, though, Robert, like I think that I mean we say Jesus is love all the time. You know what I mean? We say we're supposed to have brotherly love for other people and things like that all the time. And I know that when I learned all this stuff, I've said it before, but like I love Jesus. So when I heard about all the stories about his infancy, that like he all the things he did as a child, all the things he did as a young adult, all the different things that were not included in the Bible. I know it sounds simple, but like the simplest story is like Jesus like going in the cave with the lions when he was little, the dragon coming out of the cave and bowing down to Jesus, like Jesus going into Egypt and all the idols fell down on their face and broke, like things like that. If you really love Jesus, and I've been in a lot of churches in my life, I've been to thousands and thousands of churches, like I can't tell you how many. And there's little old ladies there that love Jesus, there's little old men that love Jesus, and they just don't know this info. They just don't know it, and I really think that it would bless all their lives and they would love Jesus like a lot more, knowing all these things about him that he did in his life. And I know that seems like a simple answer, but I really think there's a lot of people out there that love Jesus and they just don't know this stuff is true. And if they found out it was, I think they'd tell their friends, to be honest. Like I think it would spread fast, you know?
I think it's easy to see how some people's perception of this might be that this is all intellectual, um, academic kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it so transcends that. It is so much more than just some intellectual academic kind of pursuit. This isn't just about textual comparison or something. We're talking about a mystery that is for the ages. You're talking about
Right.
something that not only can but will, because the thing is, the fact that we are given these tools, the fact that we're given these insights, there's a certain inevitability to the fact that this is going to happen because it was written down. And once you recognize and are able to decode what was encoded, that's the important thing. It was clearly encoded. This book was really set aside for the elect to come at the end of time with 10,000s of his elect ones. In other words, to what? To execute judgment. So we've been given power at his coming, where we have the power to speed his coming, right? That's his power. That's his coming. It's in our hands. It's on us. The onus, again, is on us, right? So because of that, if we have the power to speed it up through our actions and through our words and through our obedience, it sort of implies that we have the power to delay it, if you will, by our inaction.
Yep.
So, in other words, if we could speed it up, the reason why it hasn't happened yet is due to our lack of knowledge as to how to do it or what to
Right.
do exactly. But once
Yeah.
you know what to do, then you could start thinking about how to do it. we're just having a podcast. We're just sort of talking about it. And so it kind of is still in its, we're still kind of coming out of the gate here, even
Yeah,
though it's been like 20 years for me now going on, well, maybe 15 or 16 years for me on YouTube, but I've
yeah.
been talking about this stuff since the 1990s.
I know, that's
Uh,
crazy.
it's crazy because it's been a long time, nearly 30 years that I've known this stuff. And nobody's ever points to me and they're like, "Oh, there's the guy who knows," like, whatever. But I mean, the
No,
point is,
no, I
the
know,
point
but
is
you
the
have been talking about
message,
the
the
longest. I know.
message is so far beyond any one of us. The message is so
Yeah.
much bigger than any one person. That's why it's hard for me to understand why people haven't taken the ball and run with this yet. I can imagine somebody listening who has an encyclopedic knowledge of the Bible who could
I know,
use,
that's what I'm saying. I know, I know. I say that all the time. I was like, there's so many people that know the like verse by verse, the canon, like they could do this
you
so
know,
much faster than
But
me.
but see, that's why I think it's from the mouths of babes, to be honest with you, because the intellectual people, maybe they're worried about, their reputation or having to
Yeah,
swallow their pride, or maybe they just feel like they can't be wrong or something like that. There's something missing here. And I think it really has to do with the fact that there's 10,000s of us. I keep going back to that. It's not any one person. It's not
yep,
any one thing. It's all of us. All of us have to participate. It seems to me like it's telling you, hey, to get off your duff and do something here, because
yep.
because literally we have the power to do this. And I think everybody, how many people just don't share a video? You could push a button, you could share it, right?
Right,
How many people could just take what's written here and or what we're talking about here and write something, or present something, create a video, create an explanation? Anyone could do that. And
right,
it's important that we all do it, because see, if it's coming from you, it's going to be work that's credited to you. I can't imagine on Judgment Day you being deprived of anything that you put your heart and your soul into. I can't imagine you being deprived of a reward for that.
right,
I can't imagine you being cheated out of any credit that you're due on that day. You think about what you're sowing. Think about what you're doing. You're investing in your heavenly future. Think about the part that you could play in all this.
right.
Think about, and again, not even out of a selfish reason, just
No,
out
I
of the
know.
idea that it has been given to you to do something about this. To lend a hand, to like I said, to share or to discuss with others these things. You have the scriptures. You even have computers and programs and chat GPT and whatever that could help you with people,
Right,
help you to even answer your own questions about these things, right? Again, he's going to give us a mouth and a wisdom that no one will be able to deny or to gainsay. And that's why even something like the soulless computer here, the chat GPT, can agree with you, because anything that can use logic will have to exceed itself to this logic. In other words, it'll have to agree
it's
with it,
mathematical.
if because yeah, because it's right, because it's true, and it's something that even computers cannot deny or cannot withstand. In other words, they will go with this argument because it is true. And
Hu- Human beings have the ability to speak both fresh and salt water out of their mouth,
yeah,
and
you're able to.
A computer can't do that. So,
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. There's a point at which the computer tries to be diplomatic. You have to
right,
you have to keep pushing it into, the logic aspect of it, because once you really on that solid ground of, look, what does it say, what are the implications of what it's saying, like you would with any human being. And I'm
right,
only appealing to this because it's like, in terms of an arbiter, in terms of it being objective, etc. People have their opinions, people have
right.
their thoughts, people are invested in something. Like, I remember when I was an atheist, I was a staunch atheist. Like, I was kind of in your face because I didn't like the idea of throwing my life away on what I thought was a fairy tale. And in my mind, if I could take somebody out of that fairy tale world, I was doing good, or so I thought, or
Right.
wake somebody up from, keep somebody from throwing their life away on something that I thought was foolish. Then when I realized what it was, and once I came around and God sort of got through with me, what I'm saying, as far as that was concerned, that particular aspect of my life anyway, and showed me
Yeah.
that he existed and he was there, um, there was every reason to believe it. You didn't lose reason in the process. You didn't lose the ability to logic in the process. You didn't lose anything in the process of transforming. It's just that you stepped into a larger world where greater things than what you taught were true, and there were greater forces at work than you once thought. And that a
Right.
lot of what you're fighting against is a little bit of an illusion and a little bit of a straw man, because what it boils down to is I wasn't really fighting the Christianity or the Bible per se. What I was fighting was how it was presented to me, how it was understood to be, rather than how it actually was. And so
Yeah.
that was a critical realization, that I maybe couldn't have articulated at the time. I maybe understood it before I could articulate it, but it was sort of understood in my mind that this was a lot bigger than people were saying it was, and that it was a lot more pertinent than people were saying it was.
Is it
That
kind of
there's a
like you
lot more
hated?
substance there.
Is it kind of like you hated religion, not Jesus, but you just couldn't figure out the difference between the two type of thing, or is that kind of like
Well,
that?
it's like this. First of all, how many different religions are there?
A
And
lot.
then Christians can't really get it together. And see, the thing is, when I was probably at my most, um, I don't know, my most vocal about it was probably back in my college days when it's funny, just I had a roommate that had a Bible, and it was one of those big family Bibles, like sometimes you'd see like
Yeah.
on a coffee table or something.
Yep.
And I think it was trying to argue something out of the Bible, and I just sort of nonchalantly, grabbed it because I was trying to make points out of it, and I didn't have a Bible at the time, so I used his. And I was looking at the table of contents because I wanted to go look up a particular verse, and I was like, wait a minute, what are these Bibles, right? What are these books, right? Because he was
Yeah.
Catholic, right? And so I was like, Maccabees, what is that even? I've never even heard of that.
Yeah.
What is this Sirach or whatever? What is this book what is this that's in here? And then the guy tells me, he says, "Oh yeah, we're Catholic. We have more books in my Bible." And I was like, "What? Are you kidding me? There's not even like such a thing as quote unquote the Bible, right?" And I
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
laughed at the guy. I was like, "How in the world are you Christians ever going to get together if you have different Bibles even?" It doesn't even make logical sense, right? Just on the
Right.
surface of it, you can't all be right. And
Right.
so he shrugs his shoulders and this is like, well, I guess the Protestants are wrong or something. And then I think
Well.
I laughed even harder at that. It's like, okay, so you just assume that you're right because
Well.
you differ from somebody else and therefore they are wrong. You know what I'm saying? It's just like
Yeah.
so caught up in an illusion.
Yeah.
And that was what I thought. And so when I realized that they had different canons, I was like, oh, this is beyond absurd. This is beyond absurd because you're talking to people who can't even make logical sense really when it comes down to it. Because if people tell you you can't go beyond the canon, it's like, which canon are you talking about? What
Right.
religion are you talking about? These people can't even agree on the first thing. Okay. See, they don't even have a common basis. So how in the world are you ever going? You're never going to get together. There's always going to be a division. It just was so obvious to me at the time that this was going nowhere, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, how foolish is this? This is never going to get anywhere. The path that you're on is never going to converge. You're never going to get everybody on the same page. Never going to happen." And
Yeah, but that thought process that you just said is kind of like Christ's thought process when he rebukes Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan," because he says he wants to build three tabernacles, one for the Jews, one for the Christians, and one for the elect. But it's kind of funny that you had the same mindset as Jesus did, and you weren't even like following him yet, kind of.
well, I mean, it's kind of obvious just on the surface. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
it just there was no grounds for that, and these were some really long-standing problems. Like these are things that had no resolution for centuries, you know
Right.
and so it's kind of like, you got to be kidding me, right? But that's what I thought. And so I thought all religion was ridiculous like that. Like, why are you going to waste your time on that? There's other religions out there too, and guess what? They all think they're right. You're
Right.
this flavor of Christian and you think you're right. You're that flavor of Christian, of course you think you're right. And again, I'm not trying to be mean or trying to be a jerk or anything, but it's kind of like, come on. You cannot
No, I
be
know.
serious. You are how are you so blind to that? And so that was sort of my conviction. That sort of told me in my mind that I was right. But there were things that happened in my life that, again, not to get up on me, but
Yeah.
that caused me to question chance, because there were things that happened to me that were beyond chance, and things that sort of seemed like it was some greater truth was trying to tell me something. And I had
Yeah.
enough sense to sort of listen to that at some point and say, you know what, maybe there is something to this. And
Yeah.
when I read the Bible and stuff for the first time after having come to Christ, because that's a whole other story, but somebody led me to Christ and I started reading the Bible from beginning to end. I kept reading things like, oh, is this not written in the book of Jasher? Is this not written in the book of Edo? If you want to read more about it, it's in the Chronicles of whoever. You know what I'm saying? And you're like,
Right.
okay, but where are these books? You
Yeah.
go to and this was back in the 90s, right? So it wasn't really quite, the internet wasn't quite a thing, because this was like
Yeah.
90s for me. And so
Yep.
I'd go down to the library and I'd look at encyclopedias and I'd look at the books there and I'd be like, well, this book doesn't exist. Well, that book doesn't exist. How about,
Yeah, I know.
what, all these books that I'm supposed to be able to go and read, they don't even exist anymore. Thank you. Right. And then I mean, you know what I'm saying, but it's just kind of
Yeah, no, I know.
that
I
my
know. Well, no,
cynicism about it never really went
no,
away.
Liz McGee said that she used to own a Christian bookstore. She said that she was like one of the only people that had Enoch in her Christian bookstore because you couldn't find those books back then.
Yeah, and I'll bet people complained about it too.
Yeah, I know. You
Probably
shouldn't
like,
have
why
that
do
in
you
here.
have this book? Well, okay, so yeah, because I mean, the apostles read it. Hello,
I
Jesus
know.
makes allusions to it. It's because of what we've done. We've tainted the truth. We've covered up the truth. It's people. It's the deception that exists. It's what you call a strong delusion, so that people might believe a lie. People think that there's some kind of period coming up that's called the tribulation or whatever, where all of a sudden the truth is going to be, after 2000 years, is going to be supplanted with some kind of falsehood that's going to arise in this sort of
Yeah,
that period of time, and only then will we be exposed to this delusion, right? People got it the other way around. It's the whole delusion that's
they're
kept us
already living
back,
it. Right, right,
and it's coming to this realization that the book of Enoch is real, where the tribulation comes in. That's where the book of Enoch even says about it. It's for the time of the tribulation, when the wicked and the godly. So the tribulation is what? It's on the wicked and the ungodly. They're
right,
the ones who are going to be judged. They're the ones for whom the bell tolls, so to speak.
right, right,
They're the ones who are going to be losing their power. They're the ones who are going to be losing their credibility. They're the ones who are going to be losing their authority. They're the ones who are going to be losing their standing. Even the little that they do have, which again is all based on a
taken away.
misunderstanding, is going to be taken from them
Yep.
by default, because what was held back from them. Again, James says that, our payment, our wages have been held back by fraud.
Right,
When you see the fraud and when you see the wages, what are the wages? The wages are the truth, right? Is the way, the truth, and the life are our wages, right? We
right,
get it all at the last minute. You come in and you do an hour's worth of work and you get a full day's pay for it. Why?
right, right, right.
Because
Yep.
because our wages have been held back, and it really is because that's how the Lord wishes to spend his money. Put it
Right,
that
right.
way.
I
It's his
have not
decision.
wronged you. Right, I know.
It's his decision to do it that way.
Right,
The
right,
people who came
and
in and worked an hour, they get the same as everybody else, but guess what?
right.
Nobody else would have had it except for them. You see what I'm saying? That's the
Yep.
implication there. He still had to call people at the 11th hour, because the people out there weren't working hard enough. They weren't bringing in the harvest, right? And if they're not gathering, they're what? They're scattering.
Right.
See? So, I mean, that's what this whole thing is about, is just putting it together in your head, recognizing that it is the truth, and then mobilizing and actually
Right.
doing something. I have my sense that I'm being held back, of course, by YouTube, but I'm not going to whine and complain about it. I'm not going to get the reach that I once had for whatever
Right.
reason. And it could be something of my own doing. Like it could just be that I haven't gone Hollywood enough for these people to want to push me or promote me. But at the same time, this goes so far beyond me. This goes so far beyond you. This is epic. This is
Right.
something that other people on other channels should be doing. This is what other people should be working on. If there's a whole army of people out there pushing this, if there's a whole 10,000s of us working towards this end, then we should be able to reach a tipping point. After all, we have even Chat GPT on our side if we want to use it,
Right, right.
right? I mean,
It's
the point
it's
is the
pretty
point is how
sad.
they gonna how they gonna stand in the face of it? They can't. And
I
the
know.
Bible tells us this too. They won't be able to deny it or to stand in the face of it. They won't be able to withstand it. So, I mean, it's really time to go out there and start pushing this, to force the issue. Because why not? What are you waiting for? Why you want to? It's kind of like when Pharaoh wanted one more day with the frogs or something. When would you like
Right.
to take care of this? Oh, how about tomorrow? Well, you don't want me to take care of this right now.
I know.
you know, I mean, weekend speed is coming. That's what we need to do. I mean, like this thing hits the airwaves or whatever, people should be sharing it. People should be building on it. People should be teaching from it. People should be using their creativity. Don't just stand around and do nothing. Do something. Everybody needs to do something. Because number one, like I said, you're not going to get cheated out of your wages. You see how generous he is. All you have to do is put in a minimal amount of effort. What is expected of you? It is your reasonable duty to pick up that plow and do what you're told if you're going to be in his employ. That's what you do if you're a worker. Otherwise, you might as well just be doing something else and go on with it, right?
Right.
I mean, you need to be doing something. You have an obligation. And again, I don't mean to sound preachy, but again,
No,
it's
but true.
10,000s of elect people. And let's face it, do you want to stand up on that day and it's like, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that? You had this talent and you didn't use it. You had this resource and you didn't use it. You had this audience and you didn't use it. You don't want to face that. You want them to say, well done. You want them to say, listen, this was right. This was right to do. You did what was great. You enter into the rest of your father. You know what I'm saying? To
Yeah, yeah.
to understand that that's what is going on. And so that's the thing. Just realize that it is there. It is real, and it is what it says it is. It gives us this power to overthrow the world and to establish, if you will, the kingdom that's coming down out of the heavens down upon this earth as it speaks of. We're no longer beholden to the Jerusalem that is below, as Paul puts it. There is a Jerusalem which is above, the heavenly Jerusalem which descends upon
Well, it's
the
like
earth.
something. It's something to do with like John the Baptist was like really. He said his spirit was like the spirit of Elijah or something like that, and Elijah is one of the two witnesses. So it's like John the Baptist preached his coming back then, and Elijah's going to preach his coming like now, and Enoch and Elijah are the two witnesses. So
Well, it's
I'm
a
assuming,
restoration of this knowledge. Look at what is the
right,
implication of it. That Enoch was taught early on in the church age.
right,
So
exactly,
why aren't we teaching it? That
yeah,
once you realize that, once you recognize that, he's calling him the seventh ram, he's calling him a prophet, he's quoting him exactly verbatim.
the like
You
faith.
have all of the pieces here to put together. It isn't much of a puzzle once you recognize the pieces of it.
Nope.
Once you recognize again, I keep going back to it. Second Peter 1:16 is Enoch 1:9, the power in the coming. We did not follow cleverly concocted fables. This is not a pseudepigraphon. This is not a false writing. It did not come from the will of man. These people from times of old, from the antediluvian times, spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. It simply means that. And how could anybody who knows that not want to shout it from the rooftops?
Right.
Not want to have a part in that. Because what could be better? I mean, everything's written on the pages of eternity, for crying out loud. It says that everything you say, everything you utter under your breath, everything that goes through
I
your
know.
head even is known.
Enoch wrote it down. I know.
It is known. It's
I know.
understood. So wouldn't you like to have a little bit of credit, you know,
Right. Something. I know.
something in your own defense, for whatever kinds of, things you're going to be judged for? Wouldn't
Right.
you like to have something that is to your credit? Everybody, it's like an opportunity. It's an opportunity to have something to show for yourself on that day. I
It's
think
like if you
everybody
could have
should take it
it's like
seriously.
if you could have invested in like Yahoo or like any of these big like .com booms before they went like, got big. This is like something like that, except for this is like your eternal soul and Jesus who died for you, and he like did all this for us. He saved all these books for the end. So I mean, like we should be thanking him, number one, reading them, number two, and spreading the info to other people as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, everybody should. I think everybody here who is a Christian who's listening, I think you know in yourself that you have to put your hand to the plow. You have to do something. And I'm not asking for myself. This isn't some
Right.
selfish thing. This is a selfless thing, really. This is about overcoming the age. It's to everyone's benefit. It's to your benefit and to the benefit of everyone else.
Right.
This is not some zero sum thing where for you to gain something means somebody else has to lose something. For you to gain this truth means that if you use it properly, if you contribute something of it, then you're helping other people too. It's like
And it
you
can
won a
multiply.
million dollars, and anybody who learns the truth from you, it's like they won $1 million.
Right, right.
Just the
It's exponential.
you
Yeah.
you could change somebody's life with this. You could change the world with this. What if yours is the video that goes viral? What if yours is the one that pushes the tipping point? People,
Right.
you got to stop thinking that somebody else is going to do this because everybody has to do this. And he's going to bless you if you put your hand in the plow. That's all I'm saying. This is something that's worth doing. It's something that's worth talking about. It's something worth, putting your neck out for. Because again, I don't think it's going to be that big of a burden. He talks about how light his burden is. He talks about how it only takes a faith of a mustard seed. How much faith does it take to affirm what the prophets say? I keep saying that. I go back to, what if we just give the prophets, we give the writers of the scriptures credit for what they're saying? What if we just take what they're saying and affirm it rather than negate it? You think about all the hoops you got to jump through to make Jude wrong. You gotta jump through a lot of hoops to make Jude wrong. You gotta twist and contort a lot of things to make Jude wrong. All you have to do is lay things straight. Remember what John the Baptist said, little make ways straight for him, right?
Yep.
These are straight ways, right?
In the
He says
desert
all
too, which
the,
is
the
a
mountains
waterless
will be
place.
made low, all the valleys will be filled up, right? That's the idea. There's going to be a level playing ground when all of this stuff is understood. There's not going to be people in hierarchies. They're not going to be people that are downtrodden. Everybody's going to be on the same level as everybody else. Everybody's going to be the same. And that's the
Right.
thing. There's no room for anybody's ego. There's not anybody's room for any hurt feelings or whatever. This is a new beginning. This is a new start. We should see it as an opportunity to take over this corrupt world and give it back into the hands of its rightful owner. That is to say, our God.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. Well, I think that's a good time to stop, Robert. Thank you so much for coming today. If anybody has any questions for Robert, you can go to his YouTube channel, Apocryphal 1970, or if you want any of these scriptures that we're talking about or any of Robert's teachings, you can go to his YouTube channel, or you can go to scriptural-truth.com. And again, my channel is The Carpenter's Son, both here and on TikTok. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. God bless, and thank you so much, Robert. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation. God bless.
Absolutely. Thanks, Robert. Talk to you soon.